Good morning. Hello. Good day to everybody. Welcome to the first of the virtual CIO Fireside Chats. I'm glad to have everybody online, glad to have everybody listening in. Um, we look forward to a lively and useful discussion today with our speakers. Let me start with the ground rules. Well, I think everybody's on mute, so we should be in good shape. We're trying to keep the background noise to a minimum. We will be recording and we'll send out the slides. We'll send it out to everybody who registers, along with any comments. So, I'll be taking notes. If you have any sort of questions or comments, please use the Q&A. I'll be monitoring the Q&A, and we'll try to address the comments online. If we don't address them online, we'll jot them down, we'll craft notes, and we'll distribute the responses to the Q&A questions we didn't get. We do have a poll, so let me launch the poll. So in a lot of webinars, people say, oh, close your laptop, focus on the webinar. And I think in this case, what I'd rather have you do is, participate, add comments, add notes, provide suggestions. By all means, think of this as your organization. So let me just give you just a little bit of background on the philosophy. So we started this group, the virtual CIOs, but it's also the fractional CIOs. And our idea really is not to make it, tens of thousands of people. What we'd rather have is a focus group of folks who are experienced and experts and engaged. And, I've been pleased with how the LinkedIn group is growing. If you have colleagues that, are interested in these topics, please, by all means, share with them, get them to join the LinkedIn group, get them on our mailing list. We see this as kind of an ongoing process. So we're going to ask you for your feedback, your input for the next sessions. Sean's already come up with some topics for the next session, so we're excited about that. But yeah, we would definitely like to keep this going. And with that, let's go into more of the content. So here are our two speakers. I'll let them introduce themselves a little bit, but here's the background. Sean and Nick. Just so you know, we developed this session using a process. So we went out and had conversations about it, and we came up with, brainstormed, had a session about what questions to ask, and that what we wanted to get out of this particular session. And one of the things that we definitely wanted to do was come up with some learnings. So as we go through the discussion, we want to come up with 5 things that all of us can use as we go forward, and maybe learn today and take away from today's session. So with that, I'm going to just sort of give a little background. The question is, what's new, what's different? Why do we spend our time here today? And I think a few things have changed. One of them is definitely more fractional work, more virtual work. And that extends for CIOs, CTOs, CISOs, but it also extends out for marketing people, salespeople. We're seeing more and more and more of that. There have been some interesting studies by folks like McKinsey and other folks, not just about the CIO world, although there are some studies on that, but also just fractional work in general. There are more articles about it. There are more Slack channels about it. There are more resources about it. So I think the world is becoming more familiar with that kind of work model, and which means customers will be more familiar with it. MSPs will be more familiar with it. And so I think that's a model that's growing. And it's going to be here to stay for a little while. We think of the fractional and the virtual CIO both as individuals who are providing consulting, but also MSPs are offering vCIO services. And so between Sean and Nick, we've got both of those two areas recommended. But there's some problems, right? And potential problems. So, and one of them is, how do we keep the quality of the services high, right? How do we make sure that people are getting the right impression, the right value, right, for the services. Anyway, sounds like what people want out of this session is how to grow their practice, how to find clients. So, as we go through here, I think we have some questions about that. So we will try to address that, and we'll try to, maybe have an extra session, a follow-on session about, sales and marketing as it goes. All right, so that's enough out of me. Let me hand this over to Sean and to Nick. And let's start by introductions, guys. Who are you and what's your backgrounds? And Sean, if you want to go first.
Sure, definitely. Thanks, Steve. This is a great idea, and I'm really excited to engage with everybody here. I think the fractional world, as Steve said, is expanding heavily, and I have been dipping my toes into it for a matter of, say, 10 years, more at the beginning as a technology consultant and project management leader, and rebranded more as the fractional/virtual CIO, and I'd say the last 4 years. So right around when virtual work did become more of the natural response for a lot of clients and businesses, I was definitely ready to answer that bell. And I think, in my experience growing up as a IT manager, IT director, CIO, I was able to really see the need for managing virtual teams and working and collaborating and communicating with leadership groups in a very efficient way while also detecting their culture. And so that really prepared me for this move into really doing it as a solopreneur. I do have a host company that is a CPA firm. So a lot of my background is focused in professional services and the ACE industry, which has a lot of crossover with professional services and the way that you're running your technology stack. But I also love to work with tech companies, life sciences, and supply chain. Turn it over to Nick.
I think it's what do they say, beauty before age or something like that. So I'll take the mic now, right? And very similar, Sean. I've been in consulting my entire career from day one. Working up through kind of the ranks, if you will, from a pure technical perspective, but also always customer facing. And it seemed to be there was always a gap, right? If you were just, from my perspective, if I was only doing a specific engagement where, say, I was just advising on data center best practices or hyperscale or something like that, there was a gap between the enterprise level leadership and then the actual doers of the things, right? So that's kind of where I found my niche, is being that conduit or the glue between the technical folks, given my technical background, and then also being able to be the consultant for a business that is looking to capitalize on OpEx cost versus CapEx costs and things like that from an FTE perspective. So that's where I really have seen the increase of the vCIOs, vCTOs. One of the comments or questions was around vCISOs as well, right? Is companies are trying to do more with less all the time because of market and inflation, what have you, right? Technology is expensive. And given the recent technology changes in, machine learning and, large language model front-end interpretations to leverage data sets, that's changing even more. It's making it increasingly harder to find the value that you provide to your clients. So that's kind of the niche that I've played in throughout my entire career, is being that advisory person, and having fun while I do it, right? Finding joy in helping them, clients getting from point A to point Z, even if it is a longer journey than someone would like to have, right? So vCIOs, they typically are for shorter lengths of time versus someone that's an FTE that's going to be there for 5, 10, 15 years, right? And they don't get exposure to new technologies or what the industry is actually doing. So
could we just spend 30 seconds real quick in defining vCIO versus a fractional CIO, and maybe they're the same, and maybe just the nomenclature is we use one interchangeably with the other, or is there some distinction? Nick, what do you think about that, or Sean?
Yeah, go ahead, Nick.
From my perspective, it's the vCIO really has the advantage, at least from my experience. Typically, the vCIO comes in with a very specific problem or business process to go through and fix, right? Or define a process around it to help the overall enterprise get to a successful state based on their business objectives. Fractional CIOs, fractional CTOs, those types of people are exposed to the entire IT of an enterprise per se. Like you're not just specific on a specific problem. You're gonna have the exposure to everything, right? Typically, that's a longer engagement. Kind of like what I was just saying before, at least, you're looking at 1 to 2 to 5 year type engagements from a fractional perspective, where vCIOs are in and out, and they drive the value on creating and executing upon a single strategy. At least that's from my perspective, what I've been exposed to.
Yeah, I think to add on to that, I see 3 buckets starting to become very natural in this world for branding purposes. Really, and then it can be a lot of gray area after that. So virtual CIO seems to be really being embraced by the MSP and IT vendor community as that snap-on layered service, helping with strategic support mostly, but not always dipping into the operational or the other leadership focused elements that Nick mentioned. I see it a lot focused in security and ticket management and back office infrastructure. The fractional, I think, really backs up what Nick said. Is I see it a lot as you snap into the leadership group, and that person is also involved with budgeting, finance, collaboration with the C-suite, looking at innovation and strategy in a little bit of a holistic way. And sometimes in the fractional world, you are helping a company grow or get to an exit and being able to then fire yourself so that you can go move on and do other things. So it can be that level. And then the third one is interim, where you're being brought in specifically to create a succession plan for an outgoing CIO, or you're also coming in to mentor somebody coming up, and you just need to fill that gap. It's usually very much time boxed. Maybe it's a year, 2 years, but that expectation is that you're just going to be moving on, once you do that. And those can be also really foundational approaches that can continue longer as a fractional piece, but it all depends on, the moving and shaking of personnel these days, which, as we know right now, has been pretty turmoil, a lot of turmoil.
Cool. So looking back at how you got to be in the virtual CIO world, what are some things you learned that could be tips to people that are joining and wanting to get into this? We have a couple folks on the call today that have had long, successful careers, but now they're sort of looking at the horizon thinking, hey, maybe I could be a vCIO too.
Mm-hmm. I can take that
first.
Go ahead.
Do you want to go first on that one, Sean?
Oh, sure. The main, I think, benefit, and I've been talking to a lot of similar profiles where they've, worked at the Ciscos, the Apples, heavy tech backgrounds. And now we're kind of like, yeah, I'd like to take my expertise in a little bit of a different way, maybe have a little more flexibility, not crank 100 hours a week type of thing. And it's definitely there for you. You can really projectize your work cycle in this fractional world. You can also be very picky and choosy with the clients and industries that you work with. And that's probably a big part of setting up your practice is, who do you want to work with? What is the culture? What are your, specific expertise that you can showcase to them? And like we say, right there in the middle is what's a really good tip for starting up your vCIO practice. It's how can you develop very quick wins for those prospects, not necessarily free wins, but quick wins to be able to show that value prop that can also engage your client very, very easily for you. So they say, oh man, I got to talk to Nick more. He's going to be able to really help me with this. Sometimes that also changes the value prop for them when they look at hiring an FTE person, where they're saying, well, this might be like a 2 to 3 year cycle to let this person kind of start working their magic. Whereas with a fractional or virtual, it could be a couple months, and you're kind of changing the value prop with that quick win approach. And I've seen that be very successful for me.
Got it.
And very, very similar for me as well, right? Starting the practice or starting, my or building my methodologies for approaching, these types of practices are very similar to what you were talking about, right? It's looking at it from a professional services perspective. One of the things that used to drive me absolutely insane was like for value-added resellers or for MSPs sometimes in the past, they would give away the consultative, IP or knowledge sets, right? You get an enterprise architect that's going to be with you forever, right? And they're going to help you decide what technologies to leverage and what processes to put in place. And it was giving away the cow, right? You were getting the milk and getting the cow for free too. So that's it drove me insane that was being just given away for free because there was a way to monetize it, right? Looking at it from that perspective. The other part of it is, the why that I wanted to get into this type of role and continuing down through this is the ability to help multiple enterprises, whether that be at the same time or in linear approach, right? To Sean's comment, being picky and choosy and knowing your bandwidth that you have to give to these clients, because if you are really good at what you do, you have to be able to learn to say no to these clients too, right? Otherwise they're going to suck you in and you're never going to leave. And for some people that may be the best thing for them too, right? Is they can still be fractional or be a vCIO type person, but you have your main client that you've always worked with for years and years and years. You're just brought in when a situation occurs or something comes up, you help them through that process, and then you go away. It's like turning on and off a spigot as you need. That shows the value that you bring to that business, because you're able to come in and add velocity or value day one, and then you're able to go away and take the burden of the financials off of the business for a short period of time or a long period of time, and then they can re-engage you and you pick up the pieces back where you were and you start again with your feet running, right? So that's kind of how I started, was noticing from the professional services side, giving away the free services, but then also being able to, I tell people I probably have like undiagnosed ADD or ADHD, because if I'm too long in one position, I start to feel like I'm in the trenches too long, or I'm doing the same thing day in and day out. And for me, I like to embrace change. It's something that's hard, but it exposes you to more technologies, better, better ways to do things, maybe worse ways to do things, but then you can kind of build your knowledge around what you're doing, and what your value is that you're providing to your customers or clients.
So we had a question come in on the question line that's related. So I want to take a little bit of a tangent. It's about setting boundaries. So when you have a client, are there tips and methods to set boundaries with those clients so you don't get sucked in to every fire that's burning in the client's office, right?
I've had to do that heavily in my career because especially when you give, access to yourself, cell phone, Slack, etc., they're gonna ping it. I was just talking with Steve and Nick. I was on vacation last week, and I did have to talk client down from pinging me constantly. And it was an important situation. We were engaging in the final decision to get an ERP project authorized, and it slipped. The executive team basically said, well, I need you, Sean. We got to get on this call. We got to jump on a call. And you do have to set those boundaries that say, hey, I understand this is important. I can't do it right now, but I'm happy to provide this feedback. Let's get together there. You find ways around those important conversations to meet the scope of either the contract or the project you're working on. So you do have to set that up front. Now, with that said, there are change orders. And so when you look at it as a consulting gig, which I do still, I set up a very tight scope with phases. And it's always going to start with that discovery assessment. So you get the lay of the land, especially with the new client. And then you designate stakeholders, designate the time that you're going to spend to be profitable for yourself. And you build in a margin, just like you would with any job. You don't have to do billable hours. In fact, I do everything fixed fee for that reason, so that the client feels that they're getting more value around that. But that it is going to be time boxed, usually by month or quarter. And it is going to be around certain areas of the project that you have to keep in scope. So when they go outside of that box, either by time or by utility, that's where you have to draw them back in. You say, hey, this sounds like a great project. I really think we're going to have to talk about it. We're going to have to dig in to what this means to the other piece of what we're already working on. And the main nature of what other executives want to do is they always want to start implementing immediately. So you have to stay on top of that so hardcore, because when they say, well, we're still gathering data here, people, and they say, that's great, now can we start moving here in parallel? I want to start implementing. You have to always bring them back down. Now, in some cases, if you can bring in extra help to start implementing while you're still gathering data, it's possible. That's part of the value you bring as a fractional leader, and that you can multitask, potentially just providing oversight. You're not, as Nick said, you're not getting into the weeds, but you have to make sure that your contract is stated appropriately, because in the inverse, if something does blow up, they can come back and immediately say, I'm not paying you, I'm suing you for these types of breaches of contract. And you have to be able to always point to that contract and say, this is what I was here to do.
So what I'm hearing you say is doing your homework up front, right? Investing in the time to be very succinct, very clear, very focused.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then communicative, right? So that your client has the exact right expectations, both verbally and in writing, right? So that when something changes down the road, you can go back to that.
It's the opposite of sales in a lot of ways, where you do not over promise. You always under promise to create those proper expectations.
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. Cool.
100%.
Nick, you're nodding your head. Nick, you want to?
Yeah, that's exactly what I would say too. And one caveat or pitfall that I would throw in there too is I've run into in the past we can leverage the change order process, right? And sometimes you need to be able to put into place a limit of changes within a given scope, right? Because if you don't, you're going to always have change requests or scope creep, one or the other. So it goes back to exactly what Sean said, defining the deliverables and the milestones that you're trying to achieve for the business, but also setting the expectations that, hey, if you are going to consistently want changes and to shift gears and go this direction or that direction, there could be a penalty, right? There could be, a change order after you do 3 change orders, the 4th on then costs $50 a time, right? Or something like that, right? It's not much, but it's something that gets the business side of people thinking of saying, oh, if I do this too many times, if I do another 4 changes, that's going to be $200, right? Or you say 1,000 a pop if you really don't want them to leverage that process.
Mm-hmm.
It hits them in the pocketbook where they're ultimately trying to save money by leveraging a vCIO or a CTO or what have you. And then they're like, oh yeah, we need to stay focused. We need to stay driven to what we're trying to achieve for this particular project or deliverable.
Great point.
Hang on, I'm trying to get back to sharing the slides, but let's move on to one of the questions that's popped up, which is how do you keep the quality high? And this is sort of generally speaking for virtual CIOs. Is there training? Is there certifications? What are the ways to do that?
Yeah, I saw that question pop in around possible certifications. In very many professional vocations like this, there are no certifications that are directly tied to it. I have to imagine that with the explosion of this world, there are going to be organizations that start tying training to the work and try to upskill it. But there are lots of consulting and project management focused certifications. So I'm in the PMI world. I have a PMP, and there's a whole bunch of project management and business analyst certifications in that world that heavily apply to fractional executive work. So I would heavily recommend looking at starting with the PMP and then going up from there, because there's agile project management, there's all these different types of aspects around it. And then I'm sure Nick can speak more on this, because when you do start going into the CTO, CISO world, the security and other technical specific certifications go a long way. I mean, I know folks in this world that have alphabet soup behind their name because
for
they have
security
so
in particular. Yeah, there's so many security things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and that's exactly right. And I've started to see this too, where and part of what I do in my business, we do this as well. That we have a boot camp for full stack development, right?